Actually, I'm very grateful to the principal of your college, to Dr. Saluja, Dr. Shaista Irshad, to have given me this opportunity to interact with your students. Actually, 2022 will be celebrating 100 years of the wasteland. So this is a double celebration, and half a century ago, in 1970, I was initiated in the modernist school of poetry by the great giants of the Department of English at the University of Allahabad, Professor Y. Professor V.D. Sahi, Professor J.K. Mishra, Professor M.C. Joshi, and Professor Manas Mukundas. Professor J.K. Mishra had published a pamphlet on modern poetry where he isolated three broad features of modern poetry, one of which was obscurity. Obscurity, tone of disillusionment, and a new technique. Now, whenever we think of Donne, Browning, Hopkins, and Eliot, we are reminded of obscurity. Browning was Victorian Donne, and Hopkins' poetry is so difficult that obscurity is now given a name, Hopkins disease. Now, The Wasteland, consequent upon its publication, was considered a mumbo jumbo to readers. But once you penetrate below the surface of obscurity, because obscurity is not a defect, obscurity is some kind of ambiguity, verbal nuance. That's why nowadays I'm writing haikus. It is a Japanese form of poetry. Pound has introduced it in modernist poetry. So my haiku is that Hopkins disease, bliss of Donne and Eliot, fortress of poetry. If you penetrate the fortress of modern poetry, it is all a pleasurable activity. In his essay on metaphysical poets, T.S. Eliot defended obscurity in poetry, his own obscurity, by saying that modern life is complex and the poet has to dislocate language into meaning. Then, while reviewing James Joyce's Ulysses, which was published simultaneously with The Wasteland in 1922, Eliot said, the immense panorama of futility and anarchy that is contemporary history. The main problem in modernism, more so in high modernism, with which Pound, James Joyce, and Eliot are associated, was how to capture the reality, because the reality was not on the surface and the reality was complex. So, in order to organize experience into coherent, meaningful communication, they were in search of new techniques, anything that could concretize their meaning. So Eliot recommended the mythical method. because James Joyce has used the mythical method, which means that in modern times, myths are not used for a source of imagery. They become a structure. Myth becomes a structure. And when we go through the wasteland in tune with his own ideas on the impersonal theory of poetry, we find that the mythical method, more particularly mythical synthesis, was used by T.S. Eliot in the wasteland. Because remember, the idea of wasteland has been occurring throughout history, and Eliot was a Puritan. He equated sex with sin. So, the wasteland is an epic of modern times. It is an enormous elegy on the fallen nature of man. The dominant emotion which Eliot wishes to communicate in the wasteland is that of desiccation, aridity, barrenness, heap of broken images. The death of nature, then death of God in the Victorian age, and finally, in modern times, death of love. So three deaths deeply influenced modern man, and he was left with nothing. So Eliot imagines modern Europe dying of lack of faith. Hence the title, The Wasteland. And remember, there are three separate words. Wasteland is not one word. The Wasteland. Now this title is based on the central symbolism of the wasteland, which is a sexual symbol. And here Eliot finds an objective correlative for the emotion of barrenness aridity in the Fisher King myth. In his notes, he had mentioned two major books, The Golden Bough by Sir James Fraser and From Ritual to Romance by J.C. Western. And he lifted certain myths. The Fisher King myth is the overall structural myth of the wasteland. And it should not be confused with Kingfisher. Kingfisher is a bird. It is Fisher King. Fisher King violated the chastity of the nuns guarding the Holy Grail, and there was a curse on him. He became impotent. He was unmanned. He became sterile. And since the king was sick, his kingdom also became sterile, barren. Now this is the structural use of myth. The entire wasteland is a barren land where there is no spring. And as you know, so many techniques used by Eliot complicate the meaning. T.S. Eliot is highly elusive, and the wasteland is a storehouse, is a treasure of intertextuality. Now, intertextuality is a postmodernist concept. It means that a text is related with other texts of the past and other texts of the same author. Intertextuality is achieved through 7 main devices. Number 1, keyword. Number 2, epigraph. Number 3, alt text. Number 4, pastiche. Number 5, parody. 6, quotation. 7, allusion. Now, Eliot's The Wasteland is a treasure house of these devices, and as you see, Chaucer's pilgrim undertake their pilgrimage in the month of April because April is associated with physical rebirth of nature. And so they are going to the shrine at Canterbury for spiritual rebirth. But in the wasteland, for the wastelanders, there is no spiritual rebirth because physically they are living, but spiritually they are dead. That's why the first section of the wasteland is the burial of the dead. That is, and this idea is taken from Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Death in Life. Physically, wastelanders are living, but spiritually they are dead. And hence the poem, April is the cruelest month. When April comes, it painfully reminds the wastelanders of their sterility. There is spiritual rebirth, but not for wastelanders. Wastelanders have nothing but barrenness, desert, prickly pear, and cactus. Now, against this overall complex background of death in life, Eliot uses what is called picture imagery or montage technique. There are, in the first section, there are 5 disconnected pictures. Russian girl, biblical wasteland, Hyacinth girl, Madame Sosostris, and the London mob. All these disconnected pictures are juxtaposed upon a single background, giving the dominant impression through the Fisher King myth that the area they inhabit is a wasteland, is a barren land, and they are physically living, but spiritually they are dead. That's why Eliot alludes to Dante. I had not thought death has undone so many. So there are 5 distinct pictures. But then, as you know, the original title of the wasteland was Horror, Horror, Horror. And the kind of condition in which wastelanders are wallowing is a horrible situation. So we have their spiritual death, although physically they are moving around. And that's why Eliot uses the second myth, Tiresias myth. And as Eliot himself says, what Tiresias sees is the substance of the wasteland. And Tiresias is the central conscious. He is a cameraman. It is through his eyes that we see the activities of the wastelanders. Tiresias was blind, but he could see. Tiresias combined the male and female within the body. And now, after talking of sterility in general, barrenness of modern man, he examines the marital relationship, sex within marriage, upper class marriage and lower class marriage. Now, a game of chess is a euphemism for sexual encounter. And here the upper class marriage is full of sterility and barrenness. They have no sense of belonging. What shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do? Hot water at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4, and we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes, waiting for a knock upon the door. This passage by Eliot is a searing comment on the loneliness and sterility of modern man. He is forced with barrenness, he is forced with boredom, because all his sense of belonging has been smashed. Death of nature, death of God, death of love. There is, in Victorian wasteland, that is Dover Beach, love was alive and kicking. But in the modern wasteland, love is also dead, and love has been replaced by fruitless lust. And fruitless lust is not what sex meant. Then, in lower class marriage, there is this woman, Lil. She has been taking pill. So the lower class marriage is also marked by sterility. And because of taking contraceptive pills, she has lost her teeth. And that's why the pub where she is sitting, the bartender says, hurry up, it's time. Hurry up, it's time. It's a spiritual reminder. Now, after examining sex within marriage, marked by sterility, barrenness, fruitlessness, Eliot moves to the third section, that is the fire sermon, where he details all kinds of sexual perversions in the wasteland. We have the typist girl episode, which illustrates mechanical sex. Then we have commercial sex, Mrs. Porter and her daughter. We have cowgirls on the river Thames enjoying life. Then we have rape, we have homosexuality. And that's why this section, the fire sermon, is predominantly Indian, because it is based on the famous sermon of Lord Buddha on Kamagni, the fire of lust. And fruitless lust is not what God branded. Now, then Eliot uses the Egyptian fertility myths in section 4, death by water. Now, my point is that Tiresias, being the cameraman, focuses his lens on both past and present for parallelism and contrast. And like a good physician, T.S. Eliot attempts a diagnosis of the disease of the modern wastelanders in first section, second section, third section, and fourth section. And then in the fifth section, he prescribes the remedy, the panacea. And here, T.S. Eliot comes to East. This has been a pattern. In order to solve the problems of Western materialism, they have always looked upon the East, right from Emerson to W. Bates and T.S. Eliot and Allen Ginsberg. So, T.S. Eliot uses a myth from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the great forest Upanishad. It is called the Prajapati myth. Once there was Hahakar, there was horror, there was a wasteland in India also. So, Danavas, Manavas and Devatas, gods, demons and humans, they approached Prajapati. So Prajapati spoke through thunder. That's why the fifth section is called What the Thunder Said. And Prajapati speaks through thunder and says, Da, da, da. To humans he says, da, that. Because human beings are selfish. So he advises, give. दान करिए. Danavas, devils, Rakshasas, they were very cruel. So for them the message was, Dayadham, sympathize, don't be cruel. And Devatas, were dancing with the nymphs in the heaven. So for them is Damyata, control. Give, sympathize, control. And if this threefold part is followed, then there will be Shanti. Now, as you see that Fisher King myth, Holy Grail legend, Tiresias myth, Egyptian fertility myth, death by water. Something there is in India also, we have Visarjan. Things are drowned in the river so that they may be resurrected the next year. But the fifth section is dominantly Indian. The fire sermon is Indian, and the fifth section is based on the Prajapati myth. Now, the wasteland ends with Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So, some critics say that this Shanti, Shanti, Om Shanti is uttered in a funeral. So some say that the wasteland ends where it began. It began with burial of the dead and it ends with funeral. But it is not so. Here Shanti means peace that passeth understanding. The Western man's soul is in distress. They are in unrest. They are suffering from insomnia. They are committing suicide. So their remedy lies in the wisdom of the East. So the structure of the wasteland is not circular. It is progressive because, as I demonstrated in my paper on images of hope in the wasteland, and as you know, Eliot uses another technique. It is called polyglot technique. And Eliot has used words from 26 languages, including Sanskrit. So he does not use the anglicized word Ganges as Andrew Marvell does in his poem to his choir mistress by the Indian Ganges side. He uses the original word Ganga when Ganga was sunken. Then in this section we have possibility of rain. We have the damp wind, cock is crowing. All these indicate that we are going to have a dawn. We are going to have rain. The wasteland is to be irrigated. And towards the end of the poem, we have, just a minute, we have, I sat upon the shore, fishing with the arid plain behind me. This is Fisher King. He says, I sat upon the shore. He is sitting upon the shore of a river, fishing. And we cannot think of fish without water. With the arid plain behind me. He has come out of the wasteland. He has left the arid plain behind. And he says that I will set things in order. Hieronymo is mad again. So the structure of the wasteland is not circular. Moreover, poetry is not a statement. Poetry is an images affair. T.S. Eliot, by using the mythical method, by using the Holy Grail legend, he is in quest of some remedy which may redeem mankind. And then by using the Prajapati myth, he said that the idea of wasteland is not confined to the West. It has been recurring in history. Then, as you say, it is my humble submission that the wasteland is dominated by sex. T.S. Eliot was a Puritan, and Puritans were taught the horrors of the flesh. So his attitude to sex is negative. Sex related to the fallen nature of man. So I suggest that some scholar should undertake a doctoral investigation into the attitudes of D.H. Lawrence to sex and the attitude of T.S. Eliot to sex. Eliot is a Puritan. This will be a good critical study. Then, as I told you, mythical method, that is structural use of myth, is a trend of high modernism in India, in America, in England. R.K. Narayan based his novel The Man-Eater of Malgudi on Bhasmasur myth. Then there are individual devices where, as I said, that in the fire section, different kinds of sex has been described. Commercial sex, mechanical sex, homosexuality, rape, and so many things, all the perversions. Because Eliot's focus is on modern Europe dying of lack of faith, spiritual water. Remember, in Dover Beach gives us a picture of Victorian wasteland. There was confusion, there was uncertainty, but love was alive and kicking. So people had a sense of belonging. Now, sense of belonging to nature, sense of belonging to God, sense of belonging to family, sense of belonging to commitment, all these were snatched from man. That's why modern literature is grounded in loneliness of modern man. Modern man is a prufrock, having no aim, and the wastelanders cannot be redeemed unless they follow the spiritual path once again. Now, as I told you that goat and rat are recurring animals in the wasteland. Rat is associated with garbage. Our rat is associated with the sinking ship, and goat is a symbol of lechery. So, as you see, out of the 5 sections, 2 sections are predominantly Indian. The fire sermon and what the thunder said. That's why it is difficult to classify the wasteland, which kind of poem is it. So it is a poetic sequence. This is called poetic sequence, where we have 5 sections. And each section, as you see, is based on some earlier work. The burial of the dead, the rhyme of the ancient mariner, a game of chess based on a 17th century women beware women, where sexual moves are indicated by the moves of the chess. Then we have the fire sermon, death by water, what the thunder said. Now, the wasteland is the best example of the mythical synthesis because all the myths are integrated in such a manner that, but as I told you, that Eliot was deeply influenced by Ezra Pound and his images movement. Pound had made a call for dry, hard, classical verse, and Eliot is imagistic. His imagery is metropolitan. He talks of the city nymphs, the city call girls. Now in the wasteland, Mrs. Porter and her daughter, they run a brothel and they wash their feet with soda water. Yes. The sound of horns and motors which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter and on her daughter. They washed their feet in soda water. This is called commercial sex, brothel. Now, all these, then there are, as I said, 7 devices of intertextuality. All are there. When a lovely woman stoops to folly, in the typist girl episode in the 3rd section, the typist girl has a quick mechanical sex. Earlier, when a woman stooped to folly, she was full of shame, she committed suicide. But here nothing happens. She straightens her hair and puts a record on the gramophone as if nothing happened. So you see, in place of love, there is fruitless lust, there is homosexuality, we have references to Philomela, so we have crude reference to rape, then we have reference to unreal city, we have reference to homosexuality, etc., etc. Overall, through the symbolism of sex, Eliot illustrates the fallen nature of the wastelanders, their various activities which are all futile, associated with goat and rat, and the ship of Western civilization is sinking. But as I told you, Eliot had studied Sanskrit. He had also studied New Humanism. He was a student of Irving Babbitt. And New Humanism says you can't go beyond the immediate. And modernism means commitment to reality. उसकी आंखों पे कसीदे तो लिखे होंगे तुमने, उसकी आंख से बहता हुआ काजल नहीं देखा. So Sarojini Naidu is a romantic poet, whereas Kamala Das is a modern poet committed to reality. Because poets glorify the eyes, काली काली आंखें, etc., etc., लेकिन उनके आंख से बहता हुआ काजल नहीं देखा. Eliot is a new humanist. He is committed to the reality around, disillusionment, loneliness, alienation, boredom in upper class marriage, boredom in lower class marriage, sex outside marriage, etc., etc. That's why I call the wasteland a major poetic statement on the plight of humanity. सुना है उसने आंख बंद कर ली, सुना है उसने आंख बंद कर ली, कई रातों से सोया नहीं था. Because of this condition of modern Europe, we had the emergence of what is called the cult of suicide, beginning with Sylvia Plath and Sexton and many others. So, we must not be swept away by the apparent obscurity of the wasteland. But as I know, once modern poets like Donne, they combine the pleasure of poetry with the pleasure of puzzle, and they just not simply express emotion. Most poetry, romantic poetry, lyrical poetry is facile, easy, because it expresses emotion. Whereas Donne, Browning, Eliot, Hopkins, they attempt analysis of emotion. That's why their approach is intellectual, their approach is analytical. They go in for conceit. Eliot, I remember very well, Professor Manas Mukul Das had pointed out that when the sensibility changes, images also change. So he used to talk of 3 evening images. One evening image from the romantic age by the sea. It's a beauteous evening, calm and free. The holy time is quiet as a nun, breathless with adoration. Then we have Victorian age, Arnold Dover Beach, evening image. On the surface, it's all calm, but below the surface, there is commotion, there is uneasiness. Then we have T.S. Eliot's evening image, Prof. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient is thrice upon a table. There is disease within and disease without, but he is thrice, so he can't cry out. This is a picture of silent agony. So Eliot articulates, but remember, as I told you, Eliot's political career was dominated by 3 key words: boredom, horror, glory. Boredom dominates the early poetry, Prufrock. Horror dominates the middle page, The Wasteland, and The Wasteland is a poem of disillusionment, poem of tragic awareness, poem of pain, poem of suffering, poem of boredom, poem of loneliness. I quoted a line, what shall we do tomorrow? Then the other was, you are talking of tomorrow, what shall we ever do? Then hot water at 10, if it rains, a closed car at 4. So this is Eliot's comment on loneliness, which is so celebrated by Ernest Hemingway, Theatre of the Absurd. Now, as you have seen that out of Western materialism rose the hippie culture. They ran to India. Beat poets came to India for inspiration. So that pattern is implicit in the wasteland also. We have Western materialism juxtaposed with Eastern mysticism, Eastern wisdom. This is the case in Meru, this is the case in Emerson and other writers. Now, this is what I wanted to tell you, that the wasteland is a complex poem, no doubt, because the modern age is complex. Reacting upon the sensibility of a writer, the writer is forced to forge new technique, because this was the central problem, not of Eliot, but of all writers. All the writers are experimental. They are searching for a proper technique to capture the epistemological reality of modern time. So we had all the movements: Impressionism, Expressionism, stream of consciousness, absurdism, myth, etc., etc. So Eliot, The Wasteland is a new technique. Although, later on, Philip Larkin said that I do not write myth kitty poetry. He was referring to T.S. Eliot. But mythical, this is a landmark quality of modernist literature, that modernist literature is based on structural use of myths. Myths are used to interpret contemporary realities, or classical myth is interpreted in the light of modern realities. Then myth is also used for as a source of imagery. Now Eliot illumines the condition of the modern wasteland, that is modern Europe, dying of the lack of faith, spiritual water. But as I said that there are positive images of hope in the wasteland, which indicates that we shall be out of the wasteland, we shall leave behind the wasteland and look for a new meaningful life. This is what is the meaning of the closing verse of the poem, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So notice the contrast. April is the cruelest month. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And this Shanti area says, peace that passes understanding. You know, people generally say कि मेरी आत्मा बहुत बेचैन है, I am in unrest, I am in the grip of depression. So there are various reasons, and if you investigate the causes of suicide in India, we have this sense of alienation, sense of boredom, sense of purposelessness, sense of futility, which Eliot pointed out. The immense panorama of futility and anarchy that is contemporary history. So, Eliot, as per his theory of poetry, used objective correlative. It's a different matter that Eliot is not a crossroad poet. He is highly innovative, he is highly experimentalism. That is why not all poets writing in the 20th century are modern. There was a particular school called modernist school of poetry, and then there is a term called high modernism. High modernism is associated with avant-garde, innovative, experimental, novel forging of techniques to express the mood, and the poet can do anything. As you see, London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down, and there is no comma. So even flirtation with a comma becomes a technique. Everything, keywords, pastiche, parody, old text, everything becomes a part of technique, because anything can be a technique if it is instrumental in conveying the meaning a poet desires, intends to convey. Now, if you want to know anything, I can go on. It's a large poem. But once you understand the dominant emotion, and as I said, dominant emotion is desiccation. DESICCATION. Desiccation means aridity, dehydration, barrenness, cactus, and the wasteland shows our civilization, our culture is a heap of broken images. A heap of broken images. All our idols have been broken. All our support has been snapped. We are left lonely. There is breakdown of communication. We are physically moving, but spiritually we are dead. Hence, the wasteland. Now I invite questions, clarifications. Although I have been very clear in my presentation, I once again say we have intertextuality, we have mythical method, polyglot technique, poetic shorthand, images poetry, and the wasteland is a highly elusive poetry. There are references to Greek. There at every step we have allusion. Now this allusion is part of the 7 devices of intertextuality which I numbered 1, 2, 3. If you have not noted down, because the wasteland was written in 1922, but it is a treasure house of intertextuality, which is a postmodernist concept formulated by Julia Kristeva. So don't go for literal meaning or paraphrase of this line or that line, because poetry is not a statement. Poetry is vision. Imagery is used to convey that meaning. A poet uses imagery.
Sir, you mentioned 3 important dominant words in the career of T.S. Eliot as a poet.
Boredom, horror, glory. He penetrated below the surface to find out boredom, horror, glory. Boredom, early poetry, horror, middle poetry, and after that he wrote aerial poems where we have growth of religious sensibility, and in 4 quarters he discovered the glory of life.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So 3 key words define his entire political career.
Is anybody having any question? Students? Sir, I think you explained the entire thing in such a lucid manner. I sincerely...
I can go on speaking on the wasteland, but I do not want to to be bored with my lecture, but I have conveyed the essential structural myth structure, and as I told you, structure. T.S. Eliot does not use romantic imagery. He is anti-romantic. He uses anti-romantic metropolitan urban imagery, and we have absence of nature. We have only references to pebbles. We have references to desert, aridity. We have prickly pear, cactus. You cannot have a spring in the wasteland.
Yes, sir, I think you have cleared everybody's doubt and you have not left even a single, Eliot has been covered in such a vast manner, sir. We all are left speechless and spellbound, sir, as you...
Because I wanted to give you a rounded discussion on the wasteland, so I mentioned the technique, I mentioned the theme, but theme is not separate from technique.
Yes.
How does the poem mean? So meaning is conveyed through objective correlative, through the central. The wasteland is the title is the central symbolism of the wasteland, and this symbolism is based on sex.
Yes, sir. Shelja, I think you can take over now. Please unmute yourself, Shelja.
Yes, ma'am. Now I request Ms. Apurva, Research Scholar, Department of English, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir, for delivering such an interesting, exhaustive, and meaningful lecture. Sir, you covered the entire topic in a short span of time in a very exhaustive yet simple way. It was indeed our pleasure to have such
Just a minute. Shaista, the computer enumerated 20 words from 26 languages used in the wasteland. Remember, 26 languages. And this technique is called the polyglot technique. Even single words convey some meaning, as the use of Ganga. He does not use the word Ganges. He uses Ganga. He uses the word Himan, Shanti, Shanti. But there are words from 26 languages as counted by a computer. So remember, 26 languages.
Thank you so much.
Called polyglot technique. Polyglot. Polyglot technique. Remember, 7 devices of intertextuality.
Shelja, mute yourself.
And now,
Yes.
please carry on.
Yes,
Apurva.
Shelja, please mute yourself.
Thank you so much, sir, for delivering such an interesting, exhaustive, and meaningful lecture. Sir, you covered the entire topic in a short span of time in a very exhaustive yet simple way. It was indeed our pleasure to have Sir amongst us today, who is such an erudite scholar having an expertise over the subject. We students stand thoroughly satiated by your presentation. I, Apurva, Research Scholar, Department of English, Ishwarsharan PG College, would like to extend a heartiest thanks to Professor S. Abidi, insightful lecture
S.Z.H.
for
Abidi.
us, insightful
S.Z.H.
lecture
Apurva S.Z.H.
S.Z.H. Abidi, insightful lecture for us and the faculty members of our college. We would certainly request our teachers to invite for more such academic
हाँ
enrichment